Randy Helmo, it's Dave Scott, the Boomer Music Experience. It's June 2024, and Randy and I are going all the way back to 1962 to follow one of the greatest bands put on the earth, the Rolling Stones. Now, you're going to be the good guy. I'm going to be the bad guy. I'll be the rebel today. How's that? And you be the
Okay.
good guy. 'Cause I know I always make you be the rebel, but and I thought about this, Randy. And before we even start this, I thought about your age, and
Hmm.
not to give it away to the folks, but you
Yep,
were 14 years old in 1962 when the Stones got going.
that's
You've
right.
seen the Rolling Stones your whole freaking life. Like,
Hmm.
I was impressed. I was blown away. Like, you saw their music come through all these different stages.
Hmm.
That's pretty cool, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. That's great. Yes, and there's a lot to be said about the Rolling Stones. Um, on today's podcast, I'm going to hit the highlights of the Rolling Stones for our audience, and from the early years right up to present. And we've got a fair amount to cover here, but let's let's get going with it. The Rolling Stones, of course, they are an English rock band. They were formed in London, and correct, the year was 1962. Now, uh, they've been active across, it's been 7 decades. Yes, it's been 7 decades. And they are one of the most popular and enduring bands in the rock and roll history of music. Now, in the early 60s, the Rolling Stones, they pioneered the kind of gritty, rhythmical driven sound that came to define hard rock. Their first stable lineup consisted of vocalist Mick Jagger, of course, guitarist Keith Richards, a multi instrumentalist Brian Jones. Oh, this guy was fabulous. Bassist Bill Wyman, and of course, drummer Charlie Watts. Charlie Watts. Wow. During their earlier years, Jones was the primary leader of the Rolling Stones. Now, after Andrew Oldham became the group's manager in 1963, he encouraged the Stones to write their own songs. So Jagger and Richards, they partnered together and they became the band's primary songwriters and creative force. Now, rooted in blues and early rock and roll, the Stones started out playing covers and were at the forefront of the British invasion, which happened back in 1964. Now, they became identified with the youthful counterculture of the 1960s. They then found greater success with their own material. And here, let's specify it was June 1965. I remember I was playing at the old Scout House here in Simcoe. I had a teenage dance that year. This was June of 1965. And the most requested song, of course, at that time was the Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction. I think I played that song 20 times during a 3 hour period of the dance. I'll always remember that. But
what can I ask you quick? Like,
yeah, yeah.
when they hit, what was that like? Were they like, I mean, obviously they were like the Beatles. They're like you said, the Invasion. But
Mhm.
what triggered that love for the Stones? What do you think?
I think um, because of Jagger and Richards writing their songs, they were rebels. And they, in their own right, though, they were marching up to be one of the top bands of the world. And you could see even in the early stages, their songs they requested, like I Can't Get No Satisfaction, Get Off of My Cloud, another one from 1965, Paint It Black, 1966, and on and on and on. So their songs gave a message of rebellion. Yeah, a little bit, but it was just their way. And Jagger and Richards, with their writing capabilities, and they did well, this elevated the Rolling Stones into a new level of the rock and roll era. And okay, they were a bit rebellious, but it worked for them and it worked in spades.
I had read that Jones and Richards were one of the first guitar duos that understood how to switch back and forth with lead guitar and weave the music together. That was
Exactly.
one of the turning points for the Stones, was that they understood this before a lot of other bands were even trying it, and they
Oh,
sort of mastered it, and that carried on with, that carries on throughout the Stones tradition of music, which I thought was just, I didn't realize that at the time. And one other quick one, when they first came to America,
hmm
their very first, I read this in a different book, the very first show they did,
hmm
they had a special request on who would open for them. Do you know who that was, Randy? I bet you do.
mm.
Blues
Gosh, you got me.
legend, our blues legend, used
Who's
to
that?
dance
Okay,
all over the floor. He
right.
did everything. Do you have any idea?
You got me good on that one, Dave.
It was Howling Wolf. Folks, if you don't know Howling Wolf, look him up.
Oh, for God's
And the
sakes.
Stones were big fans, and they wanted him to open because they were so infatuated with him.
Yes,
And
indeed.
I love that explained their blues roots, eh? Like
hmm
you and I always go back and always see all these great bands, and there's that blues tinge, that blues flavor
Exactly. And
that
the
comes out.
blues were dominant
Yeah.
in Keith Richards and Mick
Yeah.
Jagger's writing, the
Hmm.
writing of songs. The blues came through
Still,
very, very
still
strong.
does. Still does.
Yep.
You'd still hear it. That's great. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no, that's okay. So, yeah, so back in 1965, Get Off of My Cloud, that was October of 1965. I remember walking down the lanes there at the Norfolk County Fair, and CFRS 1560, which was Simcoe's radio station back then, they were playing that. You could hear that song 3 or 4 times in a day, Get Off of My Cloud by the Stones. It was great, really
Does
good.
it take you back? Can I ask that question?
It
Like when you
does.
hear a Stones song of that, and like you said, you heard it so much and you're so good with dates. Does it take you right back to Norfolk County Fair? Are you there walking, hearing it?
It does, Dave. It does.
It's
And I can
amazing.
remember just hearing the song and exactly where I was walking at the time. And I, of course, being Students' Day on the Tuesday,
Yeah.
uh, fabulous. It was great. A lot
Uh,
of good memories. And of course, as you know, Dave, I lived my life through music.
yep.
So we march on. 1967, they had a double-sided hit, Ruby Tuesday, and Let's Spend the Night Together. And they experimented a lot during this time frame, Dave, with psychedelic rock. And of course, their Satanic Mysteries Request album just shot through the roof. By the end of the 1960s, they had returned to their rhythm and blues based rock sound. And here again, the blues come in tremendously powerful for Jagger and Richards' writing team.
Yeah.
And in 1968, they had a huge hit single, Jumpin' Jack Flash, Honky Tonk Woman, 1969. And that's both from their album Beggar's Banquet from 1968. And of course, that also featured, and this still gets a lot of airplay today, Sympathy for the Devil.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
And did you know that like that type of music, when they were doing that genre, the psychedelic and like Sympathy for the Devil, was sort of the lead in to bands like Deep Purple, because it was like
Exactly.
they were listening to this music going, "Oh yeah, let's go," right? That sort of brought that whole early
Yep.
70 era of music. The Stones are partly responsible for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And here we can see them concocting their own sound for the hundreds and thousands of people across the world. They were formulating, but at the same time, as time goes on, as we'll discover later on in the program, they were they had the ability to change their music genre and kind of go with the times at that particular moment. And that particular characteristic of any band sets them apart from a number of bands. Wouldn't you agree, Dave?
I do agree. And I think sort of looking at where they came from in 62 up to that the early 70s, when now they're going to start playing these mammoth stadiums.
Mhm.
But they always, I don't know what it is about the Stones. They always appeal to me as a bar band. And I just
Mhm.
want to ask you that because I always feel like you should see them in a, you know, and they
Mhm.
did in Toronto. They played the Alpha
Exactly.
Combo. They played,
Oh,
that
yeah.
you just feel like that's their band, that's their sound, right? You're kind of like, those are those guys, right? So
Exactly.
I don't know.
And as you had mentioned, Dave, playing at the El Macambo in Toronto
Yeah,
at that time, that was the
yeah,
place to
yeah,
play. Nobody could touch El Macambo in Toronto.
yep,
But so anyway, getting back to it, um, Jones had left the band shortly before his death in 1969, having been replaced by guitarist Mick Taylor. That year, they were first introduced on stage as the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And of course, Sticky Fingers, 1971, and it yielded a number of hits, in particular, Brown Sugar.
yeah.
And Brown Sugar, even to this day, Dave, I get numerous requests, be it wedding, fundraiser, whatever, senior stances, to play Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones.
Huh. Still holds
And
up, eh?
that is fabulous. And we're talking like 1971.
Yeah,
That's better than good. So looking at kind of a history now, early history of the Rolling Stones. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, they became classmates and childhood friends. Now we're going back to the year 1950. I was only 2 years young then. 1950 in Dartford, Kent. The Jagger family moved to Wilmington, Kent, which is only 5 miles away from um, Keith Richards. Like, how
that's
good is
perfect.
that?
Yeah,
So in the mid 50s, Jagger formed a garage band with his friend Dick Taylor. The group mainly played material by Muddy Waters,
yeah,
by Chuck Berry, Little Richard, of course, Howling Wolf,
yeah.
and Bo Diddley.
Hey, Bo
Like,
Diddley.
how good is that? These were super extraordinary recording artists in their own time, in their own right. They were legends all in their own time.
So the blues saw them and we did a lot of covers of their music, and that sort of. I think that's how they probably got all those.
Yep.
They figured out the riffs that they wanted because they were listening to all this old great old blues stuff, and that probably just set the tone, didn't it?
Absolutely. And Jagger was carrying records, of course, by Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters. These revealed to Richards a shared interest. So a musical partnership began shortly afterwards. Richards and Taylor often met with Mick Jagger at his house. The meetings moved to Taylor's house in late 1961, where Alan Etherington and Bob Beckwith joined the trio. The quintet called themselves, ready for this, and how this is so appropriate. At that time, they called themselves the Blues Boys.
The
How
Blues
good
Boys.
is that? Wow. In March of 1962, the Blues Boys, they read about the Ailing Jazz Club, that's spelled Ealing, in the newspaper Jazz News, which mentioned Alex Corner's rhythm and blues band. Of course, the Blues Boys, they sent a tape of their best recordings to Corner, and he became very impressed. So on April 7th, they visited the Ealing Jazz Club, where they were met with members of Blues Incorporated,
Oh, there you go.
okay, who included side guitarist Brian Jones. So here comes Brian
Brian
Jones
Jones.
into the
Okay.
Stones.
Yeah.
Very important. And it also included keyboardist Ian Stewart and drummer Charlie Watts. So after the meeting with Corner, Jagger and Richards started jamming with the group. So here we have the early formation of the Rolling Stones, and all these artists, these individuals, were the best in their own right. So, like, what a winning combination here! Like, bigger than bigger than bigger than bigger than better.
Yeah.
So now we take a look at the years 1962 to 64. This was kind of like a building a couple of years for them. They wanted to build a following, a fan club, and the band played their first show billed as the Rolling Stones on July 12th, 1962. And it was at the Marquee Club in London. At the time, the band consisted of Jones, Jagger, Richards, Stewart, and Taylor. Now, Bill Wyman, he auditioned for the role of bass guitarist at a pub in Chelsea on December 7th, 1962, and was hired as a successor to Dick Taylor. The band was impressed by his instrumental and amplifying ways. The classic lineup of the Rolling Stones with Charlie Watts on drums played for the first time in public January 12th, 1963, and this was at the Ealing Jazz Club. However, it was not until a gig there on February 2nd, Groundhog Day, 1963, that Watts became the Stones' permanent drummer. And good choice. Good
Do you know,
choice.
do you know how they got that name, the Rolling Stones?
Good question, Dave. I'm
Oh,
not too sure.
okay, I'm going to tell you because it took some digging and I was curious about it. It was either a Muddy Waters album or a Muddy Waters song that they
Mhm.
liked, and it was called Rolling Stone.
Oh,
So
okay.
they took the name and ta-da, there you have it, right? So
Wow.
they again that blues connection, right?
Mhm.
Heading back to Muddy
Muddy
Waters.
Waters.
Isn't
Yep.
that great? I love that.
That
I
is
wanted to share that with you.
fabulous.
I wasn't sure if you knew, but that was a I came across that and I thought that's so cool. Like there you go, right?
Oh,
Just
yeah. Muddy Waters. By 1963, they were finding their musical stride as well as popularity. In 1964, here we go.
here we
In
go.
1964, they beat the Beatles as the number one United Kingdom band in two surveys.
Really?
Wow. They beat the Beatles in those two surveys. The band's name was changed shortly after their first gig to the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, the group's then acting manager, um, Giorgio Clemensky, he secured a Sunday afternoon residency at the Crawdaddy Club in Richmond, London in February of 1963. Now, that would be equivalent, Dave, to today's market. For example, saying Reba McEntire going to secure, or Katie Lang or Shania Twain securing a residency in Vegas, Las
Yeah,
Vegas. It's the same principle, the same definition of music, where they're guaranteeing X number of bucks, big bucks too,
yeah.
to do a residency of all their greatest hits and future hits to come.
Cool. I didn't know that. That's
That's
really neat.
very interesting.
Yeah,
Now, Oldham, he initially tried applying the strategy used by Brian Epstein. Well,
there you go.
we know that Brian Epstein
Yeah.
was the manager of the Beatles, and have the band members wear suits. Well, later he changed his mind, and because that kind of contrasted closely with the Beatles.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the Beatles, they had the nice suits, the long shaggy hair, and very clean appearance. So he wanted to make the Stones look like a raunchy, gammy, unpredictable bunch of undesirables, and to establish the Stones, who were threatening, uncouth, and animalistic.
And rebels.
Yes. So Stewart left the official lineup, but he remained the road manager, touring the keyboardist. So Stewart's decision, Oldham later said, well, we just don't look the part. The six is too many for us to remember the faces in the picture. So later, Oldham reduced the band's members' ages in publicity material to make them appear as teenagers.
Oh boy.
How good is that?
The
Now,
60s, eh?
unbelievable.
Yeah.
But here's one. Here's one, Dave. I've got to share with you and the audience. Decca Records Decca Records, who
Yeah.
were the biggest record company in the early 60s, um, which had declined, they declined to sign a deal with the Beatles. How dumb was that?
Wow, I didn't
Decca
know that.
Records, the
Oof.
Beatles?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this gave the Rolling Stones a recording contract with Decca Records with very favorable terms.
Yeah, it opened the door, didn't it?
I can't believe Decca Records
Missed that
declined to
opportunity.
seal a deal with the Beatles.
Well,
Oh well. So the band, they were to receive a royalty rate 3 times as high as that typically given to a new act, like 3 times.
as much. Yeah.
And back
Let's
then, that would have been a barrel full of money.
let's not forget Jagger studied economics too in university. He knew what he was doing.
That's right, too, Dave. Right on. And also, too, uh, the Stones through Jagger, he was very, because of his study of economics, he was very frugal and very watchful of the money.
Yeah. Yep.
So, like, that's pretty darn good. Yeah. So, Oldham contrasted the Rolling Stones' independence with the Beatles' obligation to record in EMI's studios, saying it made the Beatles appear as mere mortals sweating in the studio for the man. Boy, I never knew that. He
Huh.
promoted the Rolling Stones as the nasty counterpoint to the Beatles.
Yeah.
So, and by having the band pose unsmiling on the cover of their first album, no smiles, it's all dead serious poker face.
Yeah.
Okay. But he also encouraged the press to use provocative headlines such as, "Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone?" In contrast, Wyman said, "Our reputation and image as the bad boys came later, completely there." Uh, Unbelievable.
That's yeah.
He exploited it exhaustively. In a 1971 interview, Wyman stated, "We were the first pop group to break away from the whole Cliff Richards thing, where the bands did little dance steps, wore identical uniforms,
Yeah.
and had a snappy patter."
Yeah.
No.
They were gonna break that. They went the opposite way and marketing genius really at that era.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A cover version of Chuck Berry's Come On was the Rolling Stones' first single released on June 7th, 1963. The band refused to play it at live gigs. And here it comes Decca again. And Decca bought only one ad to promote the record. One
Really?
ad.
Huh.
That is unbelievable. So, Come On, it rose quickly up the charts in the UK to number 21. Having charted single gave the band's entree to play outside of London. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Starting with the booking at the Outlook Club in Middles, um, Middlesbrough,
Oh, Millsboro. Okay.
and that was on July 13th, 1963. Now, later in 1963, Oldham and Easton, they arranged the band's first big UK concert tour as a supporting act for the American stars, including, this is interesting, Dave, including Bo Diddley, Little Richard, and the Everly Brothers.
Oh man.
How good is
That's
that?
that's who the Stones are opening for, eh? That's
And
pretty
the
cool.
and the tour gave the Stones the opportunity to hone their stage craft, which they did extremely well.
Oh goodness, yeah.
That is excellent. So now we have, during the tour, the band recorded their second single, which was a Lennon McCartney song, "I Want to Be Your Man."
Yep.
And it reached number 13 on the UK charts. The Beatles' own recording of the song is included with the Beatles on their 1963 album. On January 1st, 1964, the Stones were the first band to play on BBC's Top of the Pops. Okay. They performed "I Want to Be Your Man," of course. In January of 64, the band released a self-titled EP, which became their first number one record in the UK. The third single by the Stones, Buddy Holly's Not Fade Away. That was a good song
Oh,
by
I didn't
Buddy
know
Holly.
that.
Reflected Bo Diddley's style and was released February of 1964, reaching the top three on the National Billboard Top 100. That's pretty good.
Amazing. Yeah.
Pretty good. So you can see their formation of their early roots here in the early 60s to gain the popularity through the fans. It was starting to build and build and build and build gradually, one month at a time, 1 year at a time.
Yeah, the legacy just is starting to grow now. Now the hits are going to come and the explosion, right? They're worldwide.
Oh, absolutely. We'll now take a look, Dave, at the height of their fame. We look at the years from 1965 to 1967. The band's second UK LP, The Rolling Stones Number 2, was released in January of 1965, and it, of course, reached number one on not only the UK charts, but also Billboard Top 100. The US version in February, the Rolling Stones now, uh, as I mentioned, reached number one. The album was recorded at Chess Studios in Chicago and RCA Studios in Los Angeles. In January and February of that year, the band played 34 shows around 100,000 people in Australia and New Zealand alone. Like back then, 100,000 people, that's a lot of people, like unbelievable. And from that album, the single The Last Time was released in February, was the first Jagger Richards composition to reach number one on the UK charts. This will be the last time. Good stuff.
Yep.
Still remember that song. And it reached number 9 on the Billboard Top 100. So they're starting to create the hits. They're making themselves known. Their first international number one hit, of course, June 1965, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Perfect. And it was recorded in May of 1965 during the band's third North American tour. And as you can see, being an international hit, that propelled the band into their next level of stardom. And that I honestly believe that song, of all the songs they've done, and they've done many, Dave, great favorite songs, that, in my mind, has to be their signature song. Wouldn't you agree?
Is that because, and when you said it hit number one, is that because when you first hear that song at your young age, that
Mhm.
was the impressionable song to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The beat of the song, not so much the lyrics, but just the beat.
Yeah,
It was so different from the Beatles. It was so different from any other British band or American band or Canadian band at that time. It You committed it to memory.
was it already the rebel persona? Did you hear the song and not know the band, or did you know the band and hear the song?
Bit of both, Dave. Bit of
Because
both. Yeah,
you wouldn't really know what you're hearing, right? Like,
that's right.
so this is these guys, the Rolling Stones, the rebel rockers, if you will, that I'm listening to. Did that psyche enter sort of the school that you were in at the time, where the Stones, like the bad boys? Was that true to that image?
Very much so, Dave. And even during 1965, the Billboard Top 100, and shame on them, they gave the Stones less than a year, and they'd be history.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
this is Billboard Top 100. They
it's
figured, oh, yeah, it's just kind of a
it's a
fly by night, hello,
yeah,
goodbye.
it's a flash in the pan, right? They're one
That's
hit
right.
wonders. Is that what they thought they were anyway?
Hello,
Wow.
goodbye. There's a Beatles song, hello, goodbye.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but shame on them. Anyway, we continue on. Their album Aftermath, that was released in the late spring of 1966. It was their first LP to be composed entirely of Jagger Richards songs. How good is that? And it reached number 1 in the UK charts and number 2 on the Billboard Top 100. Na, 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 like Jeepers Murphy. And in that, their LP Aftermath included such hits as Paint It Black, Lady Jane,
Yeah.
Going Home, just a few hits there. But that was a great album, Aftermath. The Stones' success on the British and American single charts peaked during the 1960s. 19th Nervous Breakdown,
Yeah.
released February 1966. It reached number 2 on the UK charts and number 1 on Billboard Top 100. Okay, let's try for May 1966. Paint It Black, the Stones. Again, it reached number 1 on the UK charts and number 1 on Billboard Top 100. So Billboard Top 100 is licking its wounds.
Yeah, I'd say.
Wow.
You know, that probably helped the Stones when they said that, though. That was
Yes.
totally what they would have wanted.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Just fuel to the fire, and they were the rebels, and people would buy their music then because they were against, they were against the system. They were creating that persona.
Hmm.
So as a youngster growing up in the 60s, you probably seen it firsthand. Yeah. They
Oh,
were
yeah.
basically trying to screw the man, which is what they wanted their image to look like. And they did it
Absolutely.
very well.
They certainly did. One other little song I forgot, June of 1966, and this is a cute song. Now, the lyrics on this one are definitely worth listening to. Mother's Little Helper. Mother's Little Helper.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, I
cute
forgot for
song.
that.
Oh, if you get a chance, Dave, listen to
I've
that
heard that
song.
song many, many times. Yeah.
It's a good song, good dancing tune too, but take a
The
listen to
lyrics.
the lyrics. That's very interesting. So the band's first greatest hits album, Big Hits, was released in the UK in November of 1966, a different version of which had been released in the US in March earlier that year of 1966. Alan Klein took over his role as the band's manager in 1965. There was a new deal coming up with Decca to be made, and he said he could do it for them. Oh, okay. That sounds good. The US version included the double A-side single of Let's Spend the Night Together,
Yeah.
and of course, Ruby Tuesday, which went to number 1 on the top 100 Billboard and number 3 in the UK charts. And when the band went to New York to perform the numbers on the Ed Sullivan Show, okay, and we can't forget it was February 9th, 1964, that Ed Sullivan introduced the Beatles on his show. Well, on the Ed Sullivan Show in January, the Stones were ordered to change the lyrics. Ed Sullivan told them this directly, change the lyrics of the refrain, let's spend the night together, to let's spend some time together. And they had to comply. Ed Sullivan was very adamant, very firm on that.
I did not know. Well, I'd heard rumors about that,
Mm-hmm.
but the screaming was so loud, you probably didn't even notice. They didn't.
That's right. Yeah. And they the cameras pan the audience. It was basically like a review of the Beatles and the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, we've got some more information coming up. So definitely these were the founding years of the Stones, gaining popularity with fans, their existing fans and new fans who have heard them for the first time. Very, very interesting. In December of 1967, the band released their Satanic Majesty's Request album.
Yeah.
And I think this album, and they did many good albums, Dave, this was their best. And it reached number 3 on the UK charts, number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. And this is 1967 now. So Billboard Top 100, they're taking a real kicking. Anyway, Satanic Majesties was recorded while Jagger, Richards, and Jones were quietly awaiting the response from this album from the fans and the sales from it.
Yeah.
And they were not disappointed, believe you me. Now we take a look at the years from 1968 to 1972. Jones' departure and death. Mick Taylor joins the greatest rock and roll band in the world. The band spent the first few months in 1968 working on material for their next album, and those sessions resulted in a beautiful rendition and, of course, number one song, Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Yeah.
It was released as a single in May of 1968, and that song did very, very well. Also, the next song they had on that album was the Sympathy for the Devil.
Yep.
And that's a good song, too.
Yeah, another great one.
Another great one. Yep. Okay, we now take a look at the Rolling Stones. This was at the Rock and Roll Circus in 1968. It featured, ready for this? Featured John Lennon,
Yeah.
Okonoko, the Dirty Mac, The Who, Jethro Tull, Marianne Faithfull, and Taj Mahal. Now, the footage was shelved for 28 years, but was finally officially released in 1996, with a DVD version released in October 2004. My question is here, why would they have waited so long to have released this?
Probably financial considerations all the way around. I think that would have been one of the things, right? With the death of Lennon too in 1980. I don't know. There could be so many factors in the world of rock and roll. You would know better than I.
Oh, wow.
I can't even begin to fathom. So I wonder what it was like, obviously, in England at that time. You've got McCartney and Lennon, and you've got Jagger and Richards rating. You've got probably the four best songwriters in the world at that point.
No question, Dave. No question about it.
We talk a lot about McCartney and Lennon, but we don't really touch much on Jagger and Richards because they did, when you look at an album, any of their albums, and you just start looking at Jagger Richards, like it's all the way down, right? So
that's right.
What another combo that we've sort of overlooked a little bit. Like you said,
absolutely,
one of the biggest band in the world.
Yeah, unbelievable. On a bit of a sad note, on July of 1969, Jones drowned under mysterious circumstances in his swimming pool at home. But the Rolling Stones, they were scheduled to play a free concert for Black Hill Enterprises in London's Hyde Park. That was 2 days after Jones's death. So what the Stones decided to do, they decided to go ahead with the concert, with the show, as a tribute to Brian Jones. How good is that?
Yeah.
That's better than good. And so we continue on the U.S. tour. We're talking now mid-1969. They had another number one hit single called Honky Tonk Woman. And that was a good hit for them too. Honky Tonk Woman. The Stones' last album of the 1960s was called Let It Bleed, and it reached number one on the UK charts, number 3 on the Billboard Top 100. So that was a good album, Let It Bleed. And from that, singles, Give Me Shelter, You Can't Always Get What You Want.
Yeah.
That's a good single too. So here again, the Stones journey on, producing these wonderful single hits from their albums. And these songs, Dave, I got to share with the audience, these songs will live on forever.
Yeah, they're just that tone. They've got that. They can play at any time, really.
Yeah,
they can fit in anywhere, and that's what the Stones have always been notorious for. Still to this day, their music's still relevant. They can still put out a song, and people will listen because they want to hear that blues sound, and it'll hold up. It'll hold the test of time.
That's right. Sticky Fingers cover
Yeah.
was the first to feature the logo of the Rolling Stones records, which effectively became the band's logo. And it consisted of a pair of lips with a lapping tongue.
Yeah.
And designer John Pesce, he created the logo following a suggestion by Mick Jagger to copy the stuck out tongue of the Hindu goddess Kali.
Oh, I didn't know
Wow.
that.
Very interesting. So, without using the Stones' name, it instantly conjures them, or at least Jagger anyway, as well as the certain image that they wanted to portray. And it quickly and deservedly became the most famous logo in the history of pop music. Unbelievable.
And a lot of people look at that logo and they took it at that time as they referred to it as when a child sticks out his tongue, he's telling you, I ain't going to do it. And that sort of played over to the Stones sticking out their tongue at society saying, no, we're going to do our own thing.
That's
so that
right.
premise was sort of developed on that. I didn't know the background behind Jagger coming up with it or seeing it in that light, but that's really cool. I did not know that. And you always go with the premise of what society sees it as, and society understood it to be, that's the Stones' tongue saying, yeah, to society, we're going to do what we want. That's pretty cool. Again, marketing genius.
Absolutely. You know what I mean? That was great. In 1968, acting on the suggestion of pianist Ian Stewart, they put a control room in a van. Wow. And they created the Rolling Stones mobile studio. So this way, they wouldn't be limited to the standard 9 to 5 operating hours of most recording studios.
Yeah.
The band lent the mobile studio to other artists, including Led Zepp.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Zeppelin. Yeah, cool.
And they used it to record Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4, and also Deep Purple.
There you go.
They used the studio to record their hit song Smoke on the Water.
Yeah.
Like
one of the most recognizable riffs in the world.
Yeah. Like how good is that? That's excellent. And so here we have it. They have a mobile studio. They're bringing in these acts, and very popular acts too, to share with them the hours of operation that they can make their own hours. They don't have to stick to a 9 to 5.
Nope.
9 to 5 hours. Dolly Parton, all due respect. 1972 to 1977. Critical fluctuations in these years, and Ronnie Wood replaces Taylor. In 1972, members of the band set up a complex financial structure to reduce the amount of their taxes, of course. And what a great idea. Behind every great band, there's got to be a very successful, extremely successful financial advisor. Yep. And both the Beatles and Stones had that. In November of 1972, the band began recording sessions in Kingston, Jamaica. And that was for their album Goat's Head Soup. It was released in 1973, and it reached #1 both on the UK charts and Billboard Top 100. And of course, in that album, it contained the worldwide hit Angie. Yeah. And that's a great song, Angie.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, very good song, Angie. So now we take a look at touring of 1975. And here we are, as you mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Dave. Mick Jagger had booked live recording sessions at the El Mocambo, a club in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Yes. Wonderful. And in that, they produced a long overdue live album, 1977's Love You Live. The first Stones live album since Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. It reached #3 on the UK. Wow, how good is that?
Get Your Ya-Ya's
There
Out.
we go.
One of my favorites.
That's great, Dave. and it reached number 3 on the UK charts and number 5 on the Billboard Top 100. That's right, the long overdue live album, Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. Great stuff. Could we show that to the audience once again, Dave?
Sure, Randy. Yeah, they get your yayas out, and it's one of my favorites. To be honest,
Nice album cover
yeah,
too.
it is. It's well done, and you just can't help but the songs on it are just fantastic. It's one of those albums that you got to have in your collection.
Absolutely. So now we take a look at their commercial peak, the years 1978 to 1982. The group's fortunes changed in 1978 after the band released Some Girls, which included the hit single Miss You, the country ballad Faraway Eyes, Beast of Burden, of course,
Yeah,
and Shattered. So these songs reached number 2 on the UK charts and number 1 on the Billboard Top 100. Boy, that feels good. I'm sure the Stones they just love that, especially when any of these songs reached number 1 on the Billboard Top 100.
yeah.
Following the 1978 US tour, the band guested on the first show of the 4th season of the TV series Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And very fitting, and very fitting. The Rolling Stones reached number 20 on the Billboard Top 100 in 1982 with Hang Fire. Now, their 1981 American tour was their biggest, longest, and most colorful production to date. It was the highest grossing tour of that year, 1981. It included a concert at Chicago's Checkerboard Lounge with Muddy Waters in one of his last performances before his death in 1983. And how good is that, Dave?
That's cool.
Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
He was definitely the backbone of the Rolling Stones, the catalyst of the Rolling Stones that got them going. Okay, we now take a look at the years 1983 to 88. Kind of
Quiet times.
quiet times for them. In June of 1985, Jagger teamed up with David Bowie for Dancing in the Street.
Yeah.
The song reached number 1 on the UK charts, number 7 on the Hot Billboard 100. 2 days later, they were presented, Rolling Stones, and rightfully so, long overdue, with the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. This
Interesting.
is December of 1985.
Yeah. Still a long ways to go.
That took a long time coming for them. Like, wow. So now we take a look at 1989 to 1999. In early 1989, the Stones, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Charlie Watts, Bill Wyman, Ronnie Wood, Brian Jones, Mick Taylor, and Ian Stewart, they were all inducted into the American Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is early 1989, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. Yep. Let's see now. We have, after the successes of Steel Wheels, that was their Steel Wheels Urban Jungle Tours, the band took a break, and rightfully so. Jagger got good reviews and sales with his third solo album, Wandering Spirit, which reached number 12 in the UK charts, number 11 on Billboard Top 100. And this album by Keith Richards, Wandering Spirit, the album sold more than 2 million copies worldwide, being certified, of course, gold in the US.
Cool.
So Mick Jagger as solo flight, like,
yeah,
that is unbelievable. Now, the Voodoo Lounge, it won the Grammy Award for the Best Rock Album at the 1995 Grammy Awards. It reached number 1 in the UK, number 2 in the US. Now, the accompanying Voodoo Lounge tour lasted into the following year and grossed, ready for this, and grossed over $320 million, becoming the world's highest grossing tour at that time. Now,
crazy.
I believe, I believe presently that Taylor Swift has the world's highest grossing tour presently.
I think you're right. I'll
But
double check that, but yeah, I think you're right.
yeah. And in the cover of the Voodoo Lounge tour, Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, um, as well as infrequently played songs as Shine a Light, Sweet Virginia, Spider and the Fly. These songs were all Love is Strong, Start Me Up. Uh, these were all played in 1994 on the MTV Video Music Awards at Radio City Music Hall in New York.
Huh.
Another
Another
another feather
success.
in their cap.
Yeah.
And the band received the Lifetime Achievement Award at that specific ceremony. Wow. The Rolling Stones were the first major recording artists to broadcast a concert over the internet.
I didn't know that.
That's good
That's
to know.
interesting. Yeah.
A 20-minute video was broadcast on the 18th of November, 1994, using the M bone at 10 frames per second.
I
The
don't know.
broadcast was engineered by Thinking Pictures and was one of the first demonstrations of streaming video. While it was not a true webcast, it introduced many to that technology. Very
Again,
interesting.
yeah, they're always at the front of it, aren't they? Always
Yeah. Wow.
breaking those boundaries.
Yep. Now we take a look at the year 2000 to 2011, 40th anniversary.
Yeah.
In late 2001, Mick Jagger released his fourth solo album, Goddess in the Doorway. It kind of met with mixed reviews, but it was a successful album. In 2002, the Stones released 40 Licks, which was really a greatest hits double album to mark their 40th anniversary as a band. And what a great idea. What a great idea. The Stones headlined the Molson Canadian Rocks for Toronto concert in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to help the city, which they had used for rehearsals since Voodoo Lounge tour. They helped the city recover from the 2003 SARS epidemic.
Yep.
And it was an estimated 500,000 people attended that concert.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Oh, how good is that?
Them and
And in Toronto,
AC/DC, I think the Hip was there. It was one of the
yes,
biggest shows in this country for sure.
that is great. The band's first new album in almost 8 years, A Bigger Bang, was released on September 6th, 2005 to positive reviews, including a glowing write-up in Rolling Stone magazine. The album reached number 2 in the UK, number 3 in the US. So here again, they're back at it as though they never left the rock scene.
No,
Never.
it just keeps rolling. Yeah, right.
And
what they
here
do.
again, it's a band, Dave, that they're changing with the times. They modify their acts, different sounds, different lyrics to keep in touch with the changing times.
But still that blues rhythm, right?
Yes.
It's always hidden in there.
Dominantly the
Yeah.
blues rhythm. Absolutely. And on April 17th, 2010, the band released a limited edition at 7-inch vinyl. Of course, vinyl records are now coming back
Yeah.
big time, have for the last, especially the last 2 years. If you have any vinyls that you've stored and they're collecting dust in the closet or wherever, get them out. They could be worth some serious money. And that's a
Yeah.
statement of
They're in
fact.
good shape for sure.
Yep. So on April 17th, they released Plundered My Soul, which is part of a record store promotion, record day store promotion for them. And here again, keeping with the times, the Rolling Stones, they have got it all
They
together.
don't miss a beat.
Yep. So now we take a look at 2012 to 2016, their 50th anniversary. The Rolling Stones celebrated their 50th anniversary in the summer of 2012 by releasing the book, The Rolling Stones 50. In this book, it's a new take on the band's lip and tongue logo, designed by, of course, Shepard Fairey. But it also revealed and it used different techniques during those celebrations. So here again, they still have the same logo.
Yeah.
which has now become an international logo. Every time you see that
Yeah.
logo, the Rolling
You
Stones,
know,
the Rolling Stones.
yeah.
It's automatic. Yep. The Rolling Stones, they played 19 shows in the US in the spring of 2013. That's only 11 years ago.
Yeah.
They played 19 shows with various guest stars, including Katy Perry, and ready for this?
Yeah.
And Taylor Swift.
There you go.
Yes.
The boys knew.
Yeah. Before returning to the UK. Well, how good is that? Taylor Swift. And that'll certainly be a memory for her,
No doubt.
playing with a rock group of world international recognition times and times over again. The Stones embarked on their Latin American tour in February of 2016. On March 25th, 2016, the band played a bonus show, a free open air concert in Havana, Cuba. So, how good is that?
Yeah.
A documentary of their 2016 Latin American tour premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival
Yes. That's right.
on September 16th, 2016. Like, this is good. So Toronto's getting a lot of concerts by the
We are.
Stones,
Yeah.
more than a lot of cities, not only in Canada but the U.S. In July of 2017, the Toronto Sun, here we go, the Toronto Sun reported that the Stones were getting ready to record their first album of original material in more than a decade. But recording was ultimately delayed due to, of course, COVID-19
Yeah.
pandemic. So here we go, a little bit of delay there, but that's good. The Toronto Sun, again, Toronto into the picture. On April 23rd of 2020, okay, just 4 years ago, Mick Jagger announced through his Facebook page the release of the single Living in a Ghost Town, a new Rolling Stones song, which was recorded in London and Los Angeles in 2019. And what a great tune that was, Living in a Ghost Town.
I don't
Mick
know if I've
Jagger,
heard that.
still going strong. And the song reached #1 on the German singles charts, the first time the Stones had reached the top spot in 52 years, and making them the oldest artists to ever do so. Like, how good is that? Charlie Watts, their drummer, he passed away on in August of 2021 at the young age of 80 years young in a London hospital. But he had an amazing career with the Stones.
His was so jazz orientated too, his drumming. It was really cool to just listen to that. If you ever just listen, like very clean and simple, but he was that at heart he was a jazz drummer. Anything I'd read on him, I was really blown away by his sort of his history of music, and his understanding of it was phenomenal. He knew he was deep into it, I guess is what I should say. He had his own little band on the side that did jazz, and they would just do little bars, and he just loved it. I mean, the guy was just a through and through musician. Sorry, musician.
Absolutely, Dave. No doubt about it. And I've got another little quip here, very interesting note. The Rolling Stones became the highest earning live act of, here we are, 2021. That's just 3 years ago.
Yeah,
Ready for this?
sure. Fire away.
Surpassing Taylor Swift.
Oh,
Since 2018, the two have traded the top two spots. The band began a new tour in 2022, 2 years ago, with Jordan on the drums. Now, following reports in February of last year, 2023, that former Beatles Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr would appear on their yet to be named new album. How good is that?
yeah. There you go.
Representatives for the band confirmed that McCartney would appear, but stated that Ringo Starr would not.
Oh,
But this marked the first time that McCartney and the Stones had collaborated on a studio album. Very important to note. Wow. How good is that?
that's pretty cool.
So now we take a look at just last September.
Hmm.
And what they did, they released a new Stones album. It was entitled The Hackney in the Hackney
Yes.
Gazette. Advertisement made reference to several Precious Stones hits, and it linked to a fictitious diamond jeweler.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can identify a bit with that. Called Hackney Diamonds.
Yeah.
Okay. Whose website privacy policy is that of the Universal Music Group. Hackney Diamonds.
That's
Wow.
pretty cool. And that's
Interesting.
I've heard music on that album and it's really good actually. I have
Yeah.
heard. Yeah. I've
In
heard
the
quite
in
a
the
few of them.
album, of course, they entitled Hackney Diamonds.
Yep.
Elton John, Lady Gaga, Stevie Wonder, and Sir Paul McCartney, among others, are expected to guest on the new album. How good is that, Dave?
Yeah.
Like,
That's pretty cool.
that's the
That's
best of the
excellent.
best. So on September 2023, Jagger, Richards, and Wood appeared on a live question and answer program, Jimmy Fallon, to announce the Hackney Diamonds would be released on October 20th of 2023,
Yep.
which it was.
Yep.
So here again, 2023, they're still releasing albums, and we're going all the way back, folks. The humble beginnings of October
1960.
1962, the Stones.
Um, and there's a lot of misconceptions. Like the Stones and the Beatles got along.
Yes.
Anything I've read in all the books I've read, it's they liked each other. They got along. They were
Oh, yeah.
musicians. They loved to hang out and play. And I think that's the part too. I think that was probably more stirred by the press than anything. But I mean, again, just incredible. And when you talk about and start looking at the legacy of their music,
Mhm.
like you literally can put it on and play for hours and not get
Absolutely.
bored, right? It's just kind of that music, like you said, when you're ranging from, from the early stuff all the way up to Angie, all the way up to the 2023 release. It's all good music. It
Oh,
stands the test of time, and that's the other part that I think that we don't. We had just always. I read this quote once by Keith Richards that said, the sun's there every day, the moon's there every day, we breathe every day, the
mhm.
Stones are there every day. Like he was just,
Yeah, right on.
is
That
that
is
they
so
just keep
true, Dave.
going, I don't know. They just keep rolling along. They keep
That
playing
is
music that we
that
want to
is
hear,
so true.
but
And
that's
to, of course, the acceptance of Jagger's voice on pop radio
yes.
was certainly a turning point, I do believe, in rock and roll, because he broke open the door for everyone else. Suddenly, okay, Eric Burden,
Yeah.
Van
Yeah.
Morrison,
Yeah.
they weren't
That's
so
a really
weird.
good point.
Even Bob Dylan,
Yeah.
you know. Uh, the band has been the subject of numerous documentaries, of course, and they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by Peter Townsend in
Oh,
1989. Now, they're also credited with changing the whole business model of popular music. They're the only artist to top the UK album charts in 6 different decades. They are tied with Elvis Presley and Robbie Williams for the second most number one albums on the official UK chart, surpassed only by,
the Beatles.
you got it, right on, Dave. In 2002, CNN called the Stones far and away the most successful act in rock today, adding that since 1989 alone, the band has generated more than 1.5 billion in gross revenue.
That's with
That
the B.
total includes like your record sales, song rights, merchandising, sponsorship money, touring. The Stones have made more money than U2 or Springsteen or Michael Jackson or Britney Spears or The Who or whoever, you know?
Ain't
And
that the truth?
and the Billboard stated that they are still the masters of delivering unforgettable live performances. And to finalize, the Stones have gone through at least five stylistic uh, interpretations of rock music through the decades, and their bands, well, the 60s pop, 60s acid, 70s groove, 80s new wave. At some point, they lost their elasticity and ability to reinvent. They got old. But wait a minute. No, they did not get old because even to this day, they're still touring and they're doing very, very well. The Stones have an inexhaustible relevance, and the Stones have lived and died and have been reborn again and again and again. And that is the makeup of a masterful, highly successful band. They're right up there with the Beatles, and that concludes Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and the Rolling Stones.
Unbelievable. A full hour of just listening to you talk about the Stones and understand the history and how many great albums and how many great songs that they did create for us, the listening public. We did forget to touch on one thing.
Yes.
And I want to get your thoughts on this because I had read this earlier on, and I read this a while back, but you and I both know where Mick Jagger sort of got some of his moves from, don't you? Tina Turner.
Tina
We
Turner.
got to remember the great Tina Turner taught Mick some of those moves, and I think that was part of it. Like you said, there's such a rock and roll show, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And you got a Mick prancing and strutting around.
Yep. Right on.
And his voice. I'm glad
Tina
you brought
Turner,
that up. Yeah.
She was the best.
Yeah. Simply.
Yep. Darn right.
The other part, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you about that because I enjoy his voice. It's not the strongest voice. And it doesn't, I don't know, it just fits with Keith. That's all I can figure because I think like you said, he did have success solo, but he's so much better with Keith. You know what I mean? That sound is it's them. That's what I think it is. They created that certain sound with his voice and those guitar riffs that just, boy, can't thank him enough.
That's for sure. Absolutely.
Randy, this is an amazing show. Thank you for doing this today and taking the time to educate me on the Stones.
Well, thank you, Dave. And it's been a great show. And I know we'll get a large listening audience also for this podcast.
Take care, Randy. Have a great day.
Have a good week. Be safe on those roads.